Here we go. Stop video. Got it. Okay, so online assessment, formative and summative. Here's a little plan of what we're going to get through today. When you see those little characters, that means it's time for you to do some work. And here's what we're going to be looking at today. A review of formative and summative, just a very quick review there. The different online assessment tools and the categories that they can fall into. The challenges we have with online assessment, some solutions, and then a bit more of an in-depth look at how we can build a Google form as a quiz or as an assessment. I don't like using the word quiz, as an assessment that will provide some solutions to our challenges. So let's jump straight into it. Just a quick review so we understand what we're talking about when we talk about formative, summative. So this sort of assessment occurs regularly throughout your classes, and it's really to find out how kids are going, to improve your teaching, to improve their learning. So that's formative. Here's a few examples. Most of these we can do online with the different tools that we're going to discuss today. Visuals, etc. It's a good idea not to use a computer to do them, but maybe have them do something, take a photo of it and send it to you. That's, you know, an option. We've got to make this as interesting as we can for our kids. We don't want them all the time in front of a screen. So let's jump into it. There's this little dude. So in the chat, can you just type in what sort of formative assessment? Like formal, I mean formal as in not just, well, we can't do it now, but looking to see what's going on or just having a quick question. Something formal that that you can try and do. So you can choose to respond to everyone or just to me in the chat as well. I don't mind. That's another nice little function that you can implement. So we've got people talking about Google Forms, exit slips on a Google form, homework submission, Moodle quizzes. Yeah, these are all good. If you're mentioning that people are submitting homework, can you also add how they're submitting that? What tool they're using? You know, are they using just an email with something or something through Google Classroom or Moodle? How's that happening? Oh, on a shared Google Doc, nice. A photo of work that they're doing through Google Classroom, nice. Okay, so we've got lots of good ideas in that chat about formative assessments that we're doing. So let's move on in the presentation to summative, and let's just have a quick review of that. And I think we're all fairly au fait with what a summative assessment is. Usually at the end of a chunk of work, and it's usually has a grade. Now, formative can be graded as well. And Veronique asked a question, can we send the session by email? Yes, this is being recorded, so I'll be sending this at the end of the day. I'll be putting it somewhere that you can get to it, so no problem. So coming back to summative assessment, yep, that's it there. Weighted, graded, and so on. Now, formative can also be weighted and graded, but we just wouldn't use it towards a semester grade. It's a good idea to do that, to let kids know how they're going. So there's a few examples, and we're well and truly understand those. So here's an interesting table that I found, and the link from where I sourced this is on the following slide, but it's a useful comparison of how formative and summative match up together, you know, throughout a chapter, at the end of a chapter. It improves how students learn, and the summative evaluates what they learn. Formative is usually small amounts of content, summative, larger amounts of content. And here's the link where that information was sourced from, actually all the pieces on summative and formative. And I would encourage you to have a read of that one because there are a whole bunch more sections in the article that talk more about the table and comparing each of these, monitoring, assigning a grade, etc. So it's an interesting read. It's not too long either. So now we get to tools that we want to begin to think about in the context of delivering assessment online. So let's break them down into some categories. So the first one is markup tools. So these are two tools that allow you as the teacher to mark up some work that a student has submitted. And the first one, Kami, works in Google Classroom, and I'll demonstrate that in a second. And Kaizena is a standalone that you could use with Google Docs. So if you're not using Google Classroom, the things that you can do with Kami, you could do with Kaizena just on a Google Doc that maybe a student is submitting by email or just sharing with you through the Google Drive. Then we've got quiz tools, and these can be used for formative or summative assessment. And obviously we have Google Forms, and we spoke, maybe there was an article or I mentioned quizzes previously. And then there's a Moodle quiz. Now the Moodle quiz, and I think a couple of people mentioned that they've been using Moodle quizzes, are very, very well featured. Lots of features in the Moodle quiz. They're not that straightforward to set up, certainly not as simple to set up as Google Forms or quiz is, but lots of different advanced features in there that you could use. And excuse me. Then there's the last section, proctoring tools. So this is one example that I explored a bit before this session. This is really a substitute for a proctor. So, and we'll have a brief look at how those things work, but the one that I tested, which seemed to be fairly standard across the range that I looked at briefly, they charge $5 per user per test. So it's expensive if we want to go down that line. I don't think we need to for our regular assessment that we're doing at school, but it's useful to know they exist if we want to do something more formal, that we need to know that students are being honest as they do their assessment. Any questions so far? Just throw them up into the chat if you have them, and I'll try and answer them as we go. And if they don't appear, I'll presume that everyone's asleep and we'll keep going. So I don't think we need to do this. I think we've listed most of the things that people have been using, the different tools. If you have any other tools, other than the ones that we've mentioned, that you've been using, throw them up in the chat now, and people can see them. But if not, let's keep going. Also, please mention if you're having audio issues or if you can't hear me, those sorts of things. That's helpful for me to know as well. So let's move on to some challenges that I think most of us have been considering as we've been thinking about our assessment. So because it's completed in isolation, there's no proctors. That's the problem. Students can use multiple devices. So if they were using a Google form, they could have WhatsApp open at the same time and be messaging everyone saying, what's the answer to question 2? So that's a challenge, which leads to, how do we know that the work they're doing is original? And more of the logistical challenges for us as teachers is, how do we manage the whole process? We no longer have a stack of papers that sit on the desk that are easy to move from one pile to the other. And as we do want to move them from one pile to the other, how do we give that feedback to students? So some of the ways that we can address those challenges, and again, the time required to manage all of that is also a big challenge. But some of the things that we can consider to address those challenges are using online proctoring platforms like the one I mentioned earlier, or using a tool that allows us to time an assessment and randomize the assessment questions as they're delivered. So for example, I send the assessment to everyone, and then when they begin, the questions get mixed up so that question one is different for most students. That's what I mean by randomizing assessment. You could also develop better questions that are harder to plagiarize, and we'll have a look at that in the next slide. You could use a system that manages sending and receiving assessments like Google Classroom or Moodle. Use document markup tools like we mentioned earlier. Use tools that automatically correct assessments, and use rubrics and self-assessments to a larger degree. Almost all of those things, not quite all of them, but almost all of them, we can achieve through using Google Forms to create quizzes. We'll have a look a little bit more in detail at Google Forms. Before we do, let's just have a quick refresh of the Bloom's taxonomy. And the point I was making is that if you are asking questions down in the understand and remember section, then those questions are easy to copy from someone else and difficult to know if they have been copied. But as you get higher in the taxonomy and you ask questions for students to compare something or interpret or defend, it's much harder to copy, it's much harder to plagiarize, and it's much easier to tell if the work that's being presented by the student is not their own. Now, of course, they can ask for help from someone who's sitting next to them, and nothing we do will help us get around that. So let's not try to get around that one, because that one we can't fix. So if we move on, what I would like you to do now is to do a quiz, and we'll do the quiz. I'll copy this link. Sorry, let me go back. I'll copy this link and put it in the chat. I'd like you to do the quiz because we're going to unpack it and understand what we did in the quiz to make it more difficult for people to plagiarize. So the link is there. Click on that link. Let me know if you're having any troubles accessing it. But take a few minutes and work on that form. It's a sample of a form that's designed to make it difficult to cheat.
Bruce?
Yes, Roland.
Have you ever tried the online proctoring platforms?
I did. I tried it this morning. It's very good, but it's expensive.
Is it the metal one that you have sent?
Yeah, that's the one that I tried.
Okay. So what is the, what's the idea? What's the features that give you? Is it the camera thing? They should stay in front of the camera, and if they move or if they use another device, it will prompt something wrong?
Yeah, all of those things. So that proctoring, it checks, you need to install an extension into the Chrome browser then it checks your system, asks you to close all the other tabs, close other applications, just have Chrome running and just have that page running. Then it asks for a form of identification that it scans. Then it asks you to take a picture of your face as a portrait. And then the camera stays on as you complete the quiz. It records you as you're completing the quiz. And there's a couple of other things in there as well. So then if you have any concerns that the student was cheating, you're able to go back and review the footage of them doing the quiz and then make some decisions from there. Okay, so just if you can just add to the chat when you're finished, and when we get a critical mass of people who've finished, then we will we'll discuss how it's been designed to make it difficult to cheat. So let's have a look at it. We'll just talk through the form itself, and we'll flick it back and forwards to the features that are really making this more difficult to cheat from. So first of all, the form has been turned into a quiz. So if I just demonstrate how that works, the settings up here is where you switch it over to a quiz. So you open up settings, click on quizzes, and there's a button at the top that just says make this a quiz. Nice and easy. And you have a couple of options there in terms of how you want this to be graded, and immediately or later after you've had a look at it. So you can choose from those two things to decide. So the second thing then is making sure that you limit this to one response over there in the general section. And if you want to, you can collect the email addresses, and you can restrict it just to people from IC. So that's definitely what you would be doing if you're running a quiz with students. You definitely want to get their email address, because then you know it's actually that person, and you want to make sure it's just IC people. Presentation, another important one there, shuffle the question order. So, and you could even show the progress bar if you wanted to, but shuffling the question order is really important, because then that means that when Rawad and I are doing the quiz together as students, Rawad's question 1 is different to my question 1. So if I've got my WhatsApp open and I'm sending him a message to say, what's the answer to question 1? He will have a different question there. It's still one of the questions that I've set for everybody, but we won't know what question we're each using. So that's a really important one. Turn it into a quiz, shuffle the question order, lock it down to collect email addresses, and restrict it to IC, and limit to one response. Then you're ready to start building the quiz. So we've done the first 2 steps there. Now, the third bullet on this slide is about the design of your form, the overall design. Now, what the best practice says is add in sections, multiple sections. Now, if you don't do that, then I can simply scroll down and view the whole quiz all at once. So if I'm on my WhatsApp with Rawad, I could say, Rawad, what's the question? What's your answer to the question about Paris? And he can help me. Then we get around the shuffle the order. But if you break it up into sections, then the students are only going to see, in this case, 3 questions at once. And maybe the question I have is not one that Rawad is looking at. So that's a very useful feature as well. So every 3 questions, add another section, add another section. So that reduces that opportunity. Now, we'll jump to the bottom bullet on this slide. In each multiple choice question, shuffle the option order. So let's have a look at what that means. So we'll use this question. What are the two categories of assessment we've been discussing? Formative, summative is the first one, good and bad, old, new. When we pop that open, we have an option there to shuffle the option order. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means that not only is the order of the questions different for Rawad and I, but when Rawad and I both get this question, formative and summative might be the third one in his list. Good and bad might be the first one. So even if I say to Rawad, what's the answer to this question? And he'll say A, his A will be different to my A. So again, it mixes it up, it makes it a little bit different. That's another really important one. If you click on those three dots and say, shuffle the option order. So we're shuffling the questions and we're shuffling the options within the questions. And again, it only works for multiple choice. I don't know if it works for a drop-down list. Let's see. Drop-down. Yes, it does. So it will work for a drop-down list, for multiple choice, and for checkboxes when you have multiple, when those sorts of questions. So coming to the last point on the slide that we haven't got to yet, and this is the really interesting one, to create branching sections. So I've made up a little bit of a graphic to try and explain this. So what we've done, and I'll pop this up large so you can see it. Within this form, we've had 3 different sections. Everyone has done all of these questions, all in a different order because they've been shuffled. And then you had to pick a random number. And in this case, it was 17 or 35. And what that did is it sent you to a different section. So this was section 17 and this was section 35, just a random number. And there were different questions there. So the section 17 had a question, I think, that asked, what's the capital of France? And the 35 people had a question that says, what's the capital of the UK? So in a teaching context, you might be a language teacher. You might have 3 different sections of a novel that you have one question you want to ask kids, like, respond to this part of the novel, tell me about the character. You can set that up so you've got 3 different prompts, and this is the character of whoever, and this is a different part of the novel, and this is a different part of the novel. So they're all answering the same question, but about different parts of the novel. You could do it in social studies, responding to a map. You have 3 different maps, or 4 different maps, or however. You have 3 different math questions that are, similarly assessing the same competencies. The exams are actually different, but you're assessing the same competencies. So if we go back to the form itself, you can see that down here where I've got pick a number, and you just make sure that there's no right answer and there's not worth any points. And you can put a color or whatever, as many as you want in there. And then it has to be multiple choice. And there's a little piece you need to click on under the 3 dots that says, go to a particular section based on an answer. So what that does is then, oh, I unchecked it. It then says, well, what section? So if they answer 17, go to section 17. If they answer 35, take them to section 35. So then you've got section 17 with the question, section 35 with a different question. So students choose, then go to one of these and then finish. It's a little bit involved in creating the actual form, but offers a lot of possibilities in terms of avoiding or circumventing a part. Now Maya is asking, what about the final score? Well, as long as section 17 and 35 have the same number of questions that are worth all the same number of points, it doesn't matter, because everyone is answering the same number of questions. So if we go back to this example, then when they choose the random number, they go to one of these sections, and each one of these sections could have 4 questions in it, and they're all about the same thing. That's a really interesting way to make the quizzes a little bit different. Yeah, and you definitely get a full score, because the full score would be section 1, section 2, section 3, and section 4. That would be your full score. But the only difference is that there are 3 different versions of section 4. Nobody gets to do more than one version of section 4, but everybody gets, if they were all worth, 5 points each, everyone gets a score out of 20. And you could put as many or as few different questions as you want into that section 4, or I have a few different sections. Once you start thinking about it, you might begin to see how that could be really powerful indeed. So those are really the ideas that will allow you to build a Google form as an assessment that can be, as much as possible, really difficult for kids to plagiarize. Now, there's one piece on here that I forgot to mention that I'll talk about now, is limit the time. And the way that we do limit the time, if we would choose this one, is in your responses section. There's a button up here called accepting responses. So I could have said, you have 5 minutes to complete this, and if you don't finish within 5 minutes, you don't get any points. And at 5 minutes time, I click this, and that means that whoever's hasn't finished, they can't submit the form. So they have to be finished, submit, out by the time limit. So you can do that and say, here's the time limit, we'll switch it off, and then you're done. So people are talking about students using Google to search for the answers, and Edward has admitted that he did that, and he's being chastised by our colleagues. Very good. I bet they had to look up Rutherglen. Anyway, that's a little bit trickier to get around, but a good way of doing that is to use this timing. It helps a little bit. One of the things that we identified in the session earlier was that quizzes will do all of these things except the branching. It will do the shuffling and the timing, but it has an added feature that you can put specific times per question. So I could have made, in this one, if this was a quizzes assignment, I could have said, this question here, what day is it today? You've got 5 seconds to answer that. Whereas, what 2 categories? I could have given you 15 seconds. How old is Mr. Knox? I could have given you a full minute for that one while he tried to work that one out. So that you cannot do in Google Forms, but in quizzes you can. I don't think Quizzes shuffles the order of the options within the question. So that's where Google has a bit of an advantage there. But yeah, other than timing things, it's a little bit tough to limit their connections to Google to find the answer. That's where, coming back to Bloom's taxonomy, is helpful. The higher up you go in the taxonomy, the more difficult it is to Google the answer. Not all those, you know, you can't put a what's the capital of France in an evaluate level question. So obviously some things are simply remember, understand. But yeah, that is a tricky one. How can we set the time for Google Form questions? Good. Hida, you can't actually set the time for the questions, but you can manually tell the students, I'm going to give you 25 minutes for this quiz. It will switch off at 3:30. And then at 3:30, you would need to open this part of the form, come to this section in responses, and close it yourself. Yes, there is also an add-on called Form Limiter that locks it down automatically. Great suggestion, Maya. Maya, do you know if Form Limiter allows you to set the time length for individual questions or just the overall form, just for the whole form? Yeah, that's what I thought. So I'm sure Google is learning an enormous amount about how they can improve things through this process with a whole chunk of the world using their tools. Okay, so the Form Limiter sets a time for it to close. I think that would just be an add-on. Let me see. I've got it. There we go. So that's an add-on that you click on, and we set the limit. We can see it working here on my screen. That pops up, and limit type, date and time. You set the date and a message, and so on. So that's pretty easy to use. So you could even set it for homework. You could set the link in your Google Classroom to appear at 8:30 p.m. and you could set Form Limiter on the form to close at 8:45. You could just be enjoying a glass of wine with your family. So that's a nice one. And to get the add-ons, you just click on add-ons and click on the 3 dots, add-ons, and then you can search for Form Limiter. Okay. Nice add-on, absolutely. Okay. So that's all I've got prepared. It's just a quick run through of different sorts of things. I did want to demonstrate. Yeah, I didn't do that yet. Let's just have a quick look at Kiva. Kiva? What's it? Kami. Kiva is something else. Kami. So Kami is the markup tool that lets you mark things up in Google Classroom. So we'll have a quick look at that. So this is my Google Classroom. This is my grade 11 IT class. This is one of their assignments where they had to take a portrait of themselves, chop it up, and create a new portrait of themselves, and using Photoshop and the various tools in there. So here's an example of how you use that tool to mark things up. So this is a really streamlined way to receive work from students and then send it back to them without having to download, copy into your drive, etc., etc., etc. So we're just loading a picture from one of the students, and there we go. So Akira has created her, lovely, she did a very good job. They took 3 photos of themselves in different angles and then created a different version of themselves. So step one is to grade with Cami. And this is all just set up for us already. Thank you to Ryan and the IT team who've managed to get a free trial for the whole school. Then that will open up this little markup window. You need to convert it. It will quickly think through that. This is particularly useful because an added functionality that it gives you is the ability to add an audio comment or a video comment to the piece of work, regardless of what piece of work it is. So if it's a written piece, obviously you can type comments and that sort of thing. In this case, it's much easier for me to talk about something in the image than to write a big explanation of what feedback I want to give to the students. Very useful for language teachers because students can also respond then using Cami. So you might say, if you're teaching a particular language, they wrote something in French, you might write back and say that the grammar is wrong. Can you read it back to, correct the grammar and read it back to me? I don't want to do that. So, okay. So here's an example of how it works. This is Akira's picture. I'm going to choose, and we'll just demonstrate the microphone option. It's a comment. I'll click on the voice comment and I might just click on this and double click. It starts up, loading audio comment. It's recording straight away. Akira, this piece is missing a drop shadow, so please make sure you do that in the next edit. Stop. So I've got that. I've got also the ability to mark up just by, I think I'm going to take a section. I could comment on this. There's undo up here somewhere, down below. Keyboard shortcuts work as well. You can do the same thing with a comment, putting a video on, capture a screen. And then to hand it in, I'm just going to click return and send it back to her, and she'll see that straight away in Classroom without having to open it up in any other software programs. And that's it. Now we've got a little bit of time left for questions. Rawad has a comment. Yep.
Yeah, can you go to your portrait collage Classroom?
Yep.
So when you add Cami,
yes.
In Create.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry.
Yes, in Create, you can create a Cami assignment right now. So you can upload directly through Classroom a Cami assignment for students. So over here, you can directly attach, a PDF or your Google Doc or whatever you want from your drive or from your computer, and then assign it. And then students will receive it once they click on it. If they didn't install the Cami extension on their Chrome, it's going to ask them to install it. Now, some teachers have many problems with students, and I've created a video only for students, and I called it on my classwork, Cami for Students. So get that link and send it over to their students. There are two ways to download the Cami extension, either through the Cami website, or they go from extensions in Chrome. Once they download it, they'll be able to add any markups or do their assignment.
Marielle's asked a question. Yeah, I don't know if we have to press return at every comment on Cami. I'd have to test that one. And thank you for joining us, everyone.